Hey folks, Zach Osterman here, IU Insider, Indianapolis Star. This is another Insider video for Indy Star TV Hoosiers, and this is a bit of a companion piece to something I wrote that went live on the website this morning. We're talking a little bit before 10 a.m. on Wednesday, August 27th, and I wrote it yesterday, Tuesday, went live first thing this morning at indystar.com/sports, and I think it's kind of one more dive into Indiana's non-conference scheduling philosophy. I think we've probably reached or are approaching at least critical mass on this topic. But it was one thing that I think has gone unsaid in all this that probably needs to be, which is that for all of the talk about sort of Indiana's wider philosophy and moving away from Power 4 non-conference games and, pushing more G5 opponents, even more FCS opponents onto its future schedules over about the next 4 years, I think there is a decent chance that, at least a non-zero chance, I'm not sure decent is the correct word, but at least a non-zero chance that some of those games never get played. And if you'll allow me, I'll explain. Indiana's approach in non-conference scheduling right now is informed entirely by the fact or largely by the reality that in a 12-team playoff world where most of the playoffs berths are, the majority anyway, are maybe not most, but the majority are decided by the committee, are decided at large, wins and losses still have tremendous agency. Your win-loss record is still and this is something certainly our friends down in the SEC have been pushing back on over the last several months, but win-loss record, wins and losses, the answer to the very basic question, how many of your games did you win? That still remains kind of the most valuable currency in college football. And that sort of pivots back to what Tony Petitti said at Big Ten Media Days, where he said that the Big Ten is open to high-level non-conference schedules, or scheduling high-level non-conference games, I should say, but that using Petitti's word, Big Ten teams need incentive to play those games. They need to see incentive because they know that losing them puts a pretty significant dent in college football playoff resumes. Now, Petitti has, as a lot of you may know, endorsed, as we move toward what we all assume will be before very long a 16-team playoff, the idea that the Big Ten and the SEC should each get 4 automatic qualifiers, 4 automatic berths each year, and that those would presumably be decided somehow or another within the structure of the conference schedule, whether it would be the top 4 teams in the conference. There's been a lot of discussion of the top 2 teams playing in the Big Ten championship game, and then 3 and 6 and 4 and 5 playing games for those other 2 AQ spots. But one way or the other, the idea is that your conference performance is what gets you into the playoff. If you're the Big Ten, if you're the SEC, and to a lesser extent the ACC and the Big 12. And if you want to criticize Petitti's sort of format proposal, that's fine. I think there are plenty of legitimate complaints about that sort of structure of AQs, but that's not up to Indiana. Indiana doesn't set Big Ten policy on that stuff. It can only follow what it sees as the best strategy for navigating whatever that is. Right now, Indiana basically says we're going to try and make our lives as straightforward as possible in the non-conference, and we're going to let our performance in conference play over a 9-game conference schedule and one of the 2 best teams in the country, we're going to let that speak for us. Under a more robust automatic qualifier setup, I think that would change, because Indiana would be able to say we can go seek out high quality non-conference games that would appeal to television partners, games that would expand Indiana's brand reach, games that would frankly, be better for Indiana as a football program writ large, safe in the knowledge that losing them won't just completely tank Indiana's hope of a college football playoff berth. Even at the same Big Ten Media Days where he made his depending on what corner of the earth you hail from, famous or infamous comment about SEC scheduling philosophy. Curt Cignetti also said Indiana would be open to an SEC Big Ten non-conference series, which is something that's been fairly widely, I don't want to say discussed in terms of between the conferences, but certainly is something that is in kind of the mainstream, kind of conversation around the future of scheduling and, those two conferences' role in playoff expansion and all those different kinds of things. The point is, Indiana has, across the course of the next 4 years or so, added a lot of G5 and FCS teams, or G6 really is probably what we should call it, and FCS teams to its schedule. And if you look closely at some of those contracts, there aren't actually necessarily penalties for Indiana canceling those games. Now, I don't think it would be as simple as Indiana calling up one of these teams that has kind of signed on in the last couple of years and saying, sorry, game's off. I think there would have to be, some give and take, some consideration given if Indiana did want to get out of a game, with a non-conference opponent, whether it was an FCS team or a G5, G6 team. I think that could even be something where, let's say in a hypothetical future, the Big Ten and the SEC set up, some sort of annual scheduling match or scheduling sort of series. I think that's even something where the conference could help subsidize essentially getting out of some of those games, because you presumably are going to get a big wedge of TV money for setting up a series like that. And that's all kind of hypothetical. Like, that's all just sort of, just shooting from the hip. But the point is, I think it's important to look at these games right now that Indiana's got in the non-conference in 26, 27, 28, 29, really more as placeholders. It's less about, these are games that are, chiseled in stone. Indiana's never going to play another tough non-conference game again. Of course, Indiana's still got the Notre Dame series on its schedule starting in 2030. I think there's a pretty robust appetite for keeping that on the schedule. I would be surprised at this point if that changed anytime soon, because again, that's a game where Indiana might look at it and say, to use Tony Petitti's word, there's more incentive there. Indiana could lose to Notre Dame and still feel like it had a legitimate playoff sort of resume or chance at building a playoff resume. But there's also the world where we get something, whether it's an SEC Big Ten series, whether it's a sort of a renewed mandate from the Big Ten to go play Power 4 non-conference games, whatever. I think we would find in pretty short order in that hypothetical future, I suspect we would find that it would not be difficult for Indiana to accommodate something like that if that were suddenly the best practice or the order of the day. And this isn't necessarily to defend completely Indiana's current approach to non-conference scheduling. I think there are some fair criticisms to it. I don't think it's unfair to say, teams that consider themselves to be at a certain level should be willing to challenge themselves a little bit more and take some of those risks. I certainly don't think it's unfair to criticize the Big Ten's 4-4-2-2-1-3, sort of structure of the 16-team playoff, much less the idea of expanding beyond that. And in general, listen, this all remains what it always is, which is a chase for revenue. Indiana also schedules some of these games that we're talking about because they know that they'll get more money at home for a non-conference game against a forgettable opponent than they would probably get in a series with let's say a middle of the pack, Power 4 program from the ACC, for example, or the Big 12. If suddenly playoff access becomes something a little bit more limited to conference performance, then now suddenly you feel liberated to go seek out big money TV games if you can get them. But the point is, whether you agree with sort of the structure or not, whether you agree with the policy or not, is not necessarily something I'm sitting here and defending or condemning. It's more just a sort of a reminder that what Indiana is doing in non-conference scheduling now, which of course really began as just a way to try and sort of design 6 wins into annual schedules more often than not. What Indiana is doing and how that has evolved in Indiana's sort of non-conference scheduling strategy and approach I think it's fair to say there's still a decent amount of flexibility built into it that at some point could allow IU football to change course, if whether via sort of some Big Ten rule or just the changing landscape of college football and postseason access in college football, suddenly it was worthwhile for Indiana to change strategy as well. So just wanted to kind of, I guess, break that down for people who prefer that a little bit more on the video side than the written side. Again, this is a companion piece to something that I wrote for indystar.com/sports that is up right now, went up first thing this morning. One programming note, other than please like and subscribe to the video always, or to the channel rather. We have expanded a ton in the last few weeks, and we are going to try and keep, sort of pushing more and more content to the YouTube page as time goes on. Again, we're talking on, I'm looking over at the date on my computer monitor, August 27th. Mike Nizilik, a programming note, Mike Nizilik and I will be doing broadcasting Mind Your Banners live tonight, probably sometime around 8:30 or 9 o'clock, basically just once we can get our kids into bed. And our goal, provided that we get good sort of reaction from that, good traffic, good interest, is to try and ensure that that's a pretty steady window for podcasting throughout at least football season. Obviously, basketball will have to be a little bit more nimble, but so that we're trying to give people a bit more of a staid place in the calendar than simply saying, hey, join us in 20 minutes, we're about to go live. So again, tonight, sometime, certainly after dinner, after kids' bedtime, Indy Star TV, Hoosiers is where to go for the live stream. We'd love to have you all there. And again, please like and subscribe these videos. For now, for the Indianapolis Star, I'm Zach Osterman. We'll talk to you soon.